My name is Julia Berkeley, spelt Berkeley, but in England it's pronounced Berkeley. And home for me is currently in Ojai. My journey to yoga has evolved over quite a time span, and initially I really resisted it. I remember when I was in my teens, a cousin of mine gave me a book with a series of sun salutes in it, and she said, "Go home and try these." I don't even really remember why, but she thought that somehow I would like it. So I took the book home, I attempted to do the postures and just found it quite difficult. Pretty much was not very interested in it, gave her back the book and said thank you. Then I went to college, and a friend of mine, one of my best friends there, was going to yoga regularly. She really enjoyed it, and she kept trying to get me to come along with her. And I just wasn't interested, so I never went to one of those classes. And then a few years later, I was living in London, and somehow I ended up finding this little studio in the East End of London, and they had a class on a Monday night. I don't know what took me there. Obviously, it was the divine in some way, but I don't really remember how I got myself there, but I do remember that I just really enjoyed it, and I started going every week. And that was the beginning of my practice. I then moved to Australia and found a yoga studio there that I loved and really started practicing regularly. It wasn't until I actually started meditating. I started doing TM, Transcendental Meditation, when I was 29. So it was really just on my Saturn return. I had a big life shift. I started meditating, and from that moment on, I just really connected with the yogic path. And then I eventually went to India a couple of years later, not to practice yoga, but ended up going to Shivananda Ashram. And there I connected more deeply with my asana practice. I started to feel my body filling with light every time I did the practice. And I just started to enjoy it more and more and more. And it's funny because people used to ask me, I had a lot of friends who were yoga teachers, and people used to ask me if I was a yoga teacher, and my instant response was, no, everyone's becoming a yoga teacher. I don't need to just join it felt like a fad in a way, you know. And then ultimately I came to Ojai, and that's where my practice really picked up. For the year and a half before that, I didn't practice yoga because I had been doing Ashtanga. I injured myself quite severely, wasn't able to practice for a year and a half. Got here, and as I arrived in Ojai, I remembered this guy, Saul Raye, who I'd done a yoga class with at Bhakti Fest the year previously. I really enjoyed his class. I knew that he lived in LA, and I thought, maybe I'll go and do a training with him just because I'd like to deepen my practice. And it turned out that he moved to Ojai the week that I moved to Ojai, and he was holding a teacher training the next month. And so for me, there felt like there was a great alignment there, and I decided to sign up for the course. And so I turned up, and I said, we have the intro circle, and I said, I'm not here to be a yoga teacher, I just want to deepen my practice. And from that moment on, for the next year or just over a year, I ended up doing 700 hours of teacher training and being asked to teach at Lulu Banda's in Ojai, which is a beautiful studio. And somehow yoga just took over me. And so from this early point of resisting, not wanting to be a yoga teacher, suddenly I feel like I'm doing exactly what I'm meant to be doing, and I absolutely love it. I'm so grateful, and yes, just said yes to yoga, and it's taking me in amazing, amazing directions. In that studio where I practiced in Bondi in Sydney in Australia for many years, there was a picture of this yogi on the wall, and I never knew who he was, but he had a very kind face. And later I have discovered that he was Ramana Maharshi. And interestingly enough, a lot of the teachers that I have been drawn to have been people who share the teachings of Ramana. And so I feel like he is a really important teacher in my life, although he is now passed over. His presence is definitely, influencing and supporting my yoga. He basically taught jnana yoga, the path of self-inquiry, examining who am I, and stepping out of the mind and finding that true self. So through him I was attracted to Gangaji, who is an Advaita teacher, and then to Muji, who is just a very, very dear teacher of mine, again of the same philosophy. And then the actual practice of asana. Saul David Raye has been my main teacher, who I've studied my 500 hours of teacher training with, and Ryder has been an incredibly important part of my yogic path. So really, I feel like my offering is influenced mainly from Saul and from Kira. And then there's other teachers who, you know, I love to practice with, Eric Schiffman, Kia Miller, Sean Johnson, really people who teach from the heart and transmit that vibration of love through the teaching. Anywhere that I feel the mind dissolving into the heart, I just go back to that. Qualities of a Bhakta. Well, the primary quality is that the Bhakta lives from the heart. And there's a sense of compassion. There's an innate understanding that love is the ultimate force that pervades all of life, and that we are all connected. We are all connected by this love field. So for me, a true Bhakta is someone who is deeply connected to this source from within, and that guides them in their life. So there's a commitment to truth, there's a commitment to love, there's an openness, there's a willingness to be surprised, to follow the flow wherever it takes us. And there's also a natural inclination to serve others, knowing that others are, you know, part of the whole, and that as we serve others, we serve ourselves, we serve the oneness. So I really enjoy being around Bhaktas. They definitely know about ecstasy, about joy, about love. They know how to dance and sing, and yeah, just fun people to be with. I remember when I did my first training with Saul, and Saul David Raye has really been the one who's taken me onto the Bhakti path. I had been chanting a little bit with different people in Australia, including Dave Stringer, but Saul, you know, taught me about what it all means and how it fits together. And I remember in the first 10-day training that I did with him, I just cried and cried and cried for the whole time. And a lot of what was coming up for me at that time was a lot of grief around my relationship with my father, and softening, and just seeing how I had had a challenging time growing up in my relationship with my father. And somehow in my heart, I had put up a defense, a protection, and just decided to keep a certain distance. And I saw that how I had done that in this primary relationship then translated throughout all of my relationships in my life. That because I was keeping a wall there was a general wall around my being. And as the tears flowed, I felt this softening. And this has definitely been one of my deepest knots that has led me onto this healing path. And more, as I chant, as I practice yoga, I feel the protective layers of the heart relaxing. I feel myself, allowing myself to open more to what is showing up in the body, and without reacting so much. So as anger arises, as sadness arises, I'm more able to allow those things to be there, to stay present, to stay connected to source, and know that all this too will pass. I always said I can't sing, and really felt myself to be tone deaf and just out of tune, out of rhythm. And it's been the practice of kirtan that has changed all of that. It's funny remembering my first experience of chanting, of kirtan. Again, I was living in Sydney in Australia, and there was a very lovely woman who I was working for a magazine doing graphic design, art directing, and there was a woman who was the editor of Marie Claire who also was teaching yoga at the time. So at lunch times, she would give me and a couple of friends a little yoga class, and I really enjoyed that. And then one day she said to me, we're going to have a gathering at my house, we're going to do some chanting, and I think you'd really enjoy it, so why don't you come along? And so I did, and I turned up. I found people sitting cross-legged on the floor, and someone at the front with a harmonium and a guitar, and we began to chant. And I had no idea about what this was all about, what was going on, and all I realized was that we were chanting Hare Krishna. And my associations with Hare Krishna was growing up in England and hearing about the Hare Krishnas, who were this cult who took people away from their families and, basically did not have good associations with this group of people. And I kind of freaked out. And at the end, this friend, Adriana, she said to me, would you like to stay for a cup of tea? And I said, no, I don't want to stay for a cup of tea. And I ran down the street and I called my friend and said, oh my goodness, I've just ended up with the Hare Krishnas. Like, I don't know what just happened. And so that was funny. And then somehow, years later, I ended up chanting. And I don't know what the transition was, but obviously, actually, it was through yoga. We started doing a few chants in my normal yoga practice, and then I started to understand what it was all about. And then it's been really wonderful in the last few years in Australia. There's been a growing kirtan movement. Dave Stringer has been a big part of that. He's been going over there regularly. And I remember him talking in one kirtan about Bhakti Fest, this festival in the desert in California where all the great musicians get together and have a wonderful time and dance and sing for 4 days. And something in my soul said, I need to go to that. And at that time I had no thought of moving over here and living in California. But that seed definitely was an important part of my journey that eventually brought me over here. So then I came over here, I started studying with Saul, David Raye, and there was a lot of chanting and singing that happened in my teacher training. And then I bought myself a harmonium, because I loved the sound of the instrument. I had played the piano, and so it seemed like a fairly natural progression to play the harmonium. And I would just play with it and sing in my room, sing to the divine, and chant with other people. And somehow, slowly, my voice is starting to open. I mean, I still have, a sense of, I haven't, whatever that means, got the most performance worthy voice, but it's not about that. And it's really been Saul's permission to not have any skill and not need to be good at singing, but just to join in, the invitation just to drop into the heart and sing to the divine, that has really brought me towards singing and allowed the voice to open. I know that my practice is working when I can be a lot more tolerant of other people and not need them to change. I know that my practice is working when I feel this flow in life, and it's almost like I do less and more happens, and I'm just drawn to the right people, the right circumstances at the right time. I feel the sense of surprise, continual surprise happening in my life of, oh my goodness, how wonderful this is. I can't believe this is happening. Really just this joy of what is evolving in my life. I feel my practice is working when I have more challenging moments, and I can use the practices to help me move through them more swiftly. I can fall apart with more grace, and just allow things to move through. And keep coming back to my center. The more that I practice, the more able I am to come back to my center. I do obviously get rocked off balance by events and situations and emotions, but I have more capacity to come back into my center and that peace. And really, one of the biggest things for me, I've been searching for my whole life for this love, for this connection. And I've been looking for it in other people, thinking that, you know, a relationship, a partnership is going to bring that to me. And more and more and more, I'm discovering that that is not the fulfillment that I'm looking for. As I chant, as I practice, I'm feeling this great sense of nourishment, of peace, of satisfaction in my being that fulfills that longing and that desire. And for me, that is just the greatest gift of all time. And I feel that this is the result of lifetimes of work. You know, it's really, there's been this search for many, many lifetimes. And through these practices at this time, I feel like I'm arriving at something I've been looking for a long time.